hospital is enough to cure only one of two who are afflicted by a fatal disease. Now, at least so long as we assume that their circumstances are equal, the person charged with the allocation of this resource ought to hold a lottery that provides each with an equal chance of being saved. But then the question is, why? Well, here's what John Broome says. It's up here on the screen. He writes that by holding a lottery, each can be given an equal chance of getting the good. It's not perfect fairness, but it meets requirements of fairness to some extent. He says it does so, of course, only if giving a person a chance of getting the good counts as a surrogate satisfaction of her claim. And he says, this seems plausible to me. After all, if you have a chance of getting the good, you may actually get it. Then he says, this contrasts with a case in which it was never on the cards that you might actually get the good you have a claim to. Now, given what at least my colleagues who are philosophers of physics tell me we know about the laws of physics, however, it's virtually certain that it was never on the cards that you might actually get a good if the allocation of that good is determined by a lottery that you'll end up losing. Now, this is true for the following reason. So even physicists who affirm genuine quantum indeterminacy at the subatomic level also maintain that the world almost completely conforms to deterministic laws of classical mechanics at various levels higher than the subatomic, involving, for example, the position and momentum of planetary bodies, billiard balls, or even the individual water molecules of a hurricane. Now, this conformity is not complete. There will always remain a chance that higher level phenomena will not conform to deterministic laws of classical mechanics. But for the sorts of events in the everyday world that give rise to harms and benefits, this chance is vanishingly small. Now, this is because these events supervene on the movements of interacting particles that are so numerous that it's nearly certain that they will decohere into states that conform to deterministic laws of classical mechanics. Now, the sorts of events that are nearly certain to decohere in this fashion include the mechanisms of lotteries and physiological processes. So crucially, these physiological processes include the neuronal firings on which human beliefs, desires, and decisions supervene. So the upshot is that our beliefs, desires, or decisions can be other than they will be only if the neuronal firings on which these mental states supervene fail to conform to deterministic laws of classical mechanics. And moreover, the familiar sorts of lotteries that we decide to run can select a different beneficiary than the one who will be selected only if their mechanisms also fail to conform to such deterministic laws. Yet the odds of such failures are vanishingly small. Now, I mean, whatever your view about indeterminism at the subatomic level, given how closely the world approximates a fully deterministic system at the macroscopic level, I'm going, for the rest of this talk, to make a simplifying assumption, unless I indicate otherwise, that the selection of beneficiaries by means of lottery will fully conform to deterministic laws of classical mechanics. Now, I think it follows that it was in the following respects never on the cards that you could win a particular lottery that you will lose on a given occasion because that coin will land tails. The initial conditions of the universe and these laws of physics jointly entail a physical state that's incompatible with your winning this lottery because it's incompatible with the coins landing heads on that particular occasion. Now, something I want to stress is that what I've said I think is true, even if we grant, as I would, that there can be non-trivial, as in non-zero one, objective chances, even in a deterministic universe. Now, by objective chances, I'm simply going to mean the following: frequencies relative to classes of events and things that share all the same type of causal antecedents at a given level of specification. And moreover, I grant that fair coins that are tossed in a deterministic universe have an objective 50% chance of landing heads, where this is understood in the following frequentist terms. Half of all coins in the relevant reference class of tossed fair coins land heads. In order, however, to assess the claim that you could win a particular lottery that you will lose on a given occasion, I think that we need to attend to the following narrower reference class than that of all fair coins tossed, namely the class of tossed fair coins with precisely the same types of causal antecedents as those of the coin that will be tossed in your case, where these antecedents are specified at a level to which the deterministic laws of classical mechanics apply. Now, assuming such determinism, all coins in this reference class will land tails. Now, if you knew that the coin that will be tossed in your case belonged in this reference class, it would no longer be rational for you to hope that you might actually get the good, since you will know that the coin will land tails, and hence you'll lose. Now, the fact that this coin is part of a larger reference class of tossed coins, half of which land heads, gives you no reason to hope that you might get the good. Therefore, the fact that this coin is a fair coin, and fair coins have an objective 50% chance of landing heads, would give you no reason to hope, once you were made aware of further details of the causes that will act on this coin, that you might win. Your hope would be based on ignorance of the way things are or have been. And let me just try to motivate, for the particular sort of case I'm discussing, why we should go down to this narrower reference class. So suppose that someone, I'll just call X, is a US resident who's worrying about what his odds are of dying of the Ebola virus, where let's just understand these odds as frequencies. So someone tries to reassure him by telling him that his odds are only 10 in 320 million, since let's assume we happen to know that only 10 of America's 320 million residents will die of Ebola. But then suppose we learn that this person lived in the same apartment complex as one American who's died of Ebola. In calculating his odds, we should now consider the reference class of all those in the same apartment complex rather than all US residents. Suppose we knew that he also shook this person's hand. We should now consider the reference class of all who had physical contact with him, and of those all who touched his sweat, put their hand to their eye, as let us suppose we know this particular person did. And then of those who did, all for whom the virus managed to get into their tear duct. Now, perhaps no one can know of whom it's true that the virus got into his tear duct, so in calculating his odds, perhaps the best we can do is consider the reference class of all who put their hand to their eye after shaking his hand, in order to arrive at justified beliefs regarding his odds. But we could also say the following true things. If no virus entered his tear duct, then his odds of coming down with Ebola are 0. If, however, some virus entered his tear duct, then his odds are higher than 0. Moreover, the odds that are most relevant to what will happen to him, whether or not knowable, involve frequencies in the narrowest reference class of all those who share the same causally relevant influences. If the laws of physics are deterministic, then in this reference class, either all will die or none will die. Now, when I refer in the remainder of this talk to the chances of a coin's landing heads or tails, this should be understood in the context of this narrower reference class that I referred to earlier. The class of tossed fair coins with precisely the same type of causal antecedents specified the level at which the deterministic laws of classical mechanics apply. Now, when the reference class is so narrowly defined, all coins will have either an objective 100% chance of landing heads and no chance of landing tails, or an objective 100% chance of landing tails and no chance of landing heads. Any chance of less than 100 or greater than 0 will be epistemic rather than objective, since they will be based on our justified beliefs that reflect our ignorance of the frequencies of heads or tails among the coins in the narrow reference class.
Let's ask a quick question. Are we supposed to take for granted that we know what causal antecedent means?
I suppose, yeah. So, right. I mean, so I'm mainly a moral and political philosopher, and I'm sort of my sort of knowledge. I mean, you won't be able to dig very deep before sort of things run out when it comes to asking these sorts of probing questions. But I suppose eventually we'll move on to the more normative bit of the talk. But now we should draw a distinction between, I mean, just to try to motivate the distinction I'm drawing between particular instances of coin tosses and other cases in which we can admit non-zero one probabilities, even if things are deterministic at the level of classical mechanics. What I think might be helpful to do is draw a distinction between the following two things. First, the application of the laws of the special sciences that provide general explanations of phenomena at that level of particular special science. For example, of the extent to which Ebola can be spread by human contact of this or that type. We're talking about epidemiology. And second, the claims regarding whether a particular event can be otherwise. For example, the question regarding the chances that X will come down with Ebola given his actual history. Now, general claims regarding the extent to which Ebola can be spread by human contact will be relevant to policymakers who must decide how many resources to devote to preventing the spread of Ebola across the population in the event of a future epidemic versus spending these resources on other things, health-related or otherwise, that might be more cost-effective. But, by contrast, our individual who's worried about his own risk of coming down with Ebola will have a different set of concerns which justify a focus on this narrower reference class. Now, here's another example involving hurricanes, which I hope might help illustrate the distinction I'm trying to draw. Suppose there's a Category 5 hurricane in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, it might be that the best of the special sciences meteorology is both stochastic and sound. And perhaps it follows from such science that the eye of a hurricane of this meteorological type, specified in terms of wind speed, size, and the like, has, at this point on a given trajectory in the Gulf of Mexico, a 10% chance of passing through New Orleans. But hurricanes supervene on physical particles that behave in accordance with deterministic laws of classical mechanics. Now, if we suppose that a Laplacian demon is able to infer with certainty from laws of physics plus further inferences he's able to make to a higher level, whether given physical realization of a hurricane of this type will contain an eye that passes through New Orleans, and suppose that given the particular physical realization of this hurricane, the Laplacian demon has calculated that its eye will certainly pass over New Orleans. Now, what, in the light of these stipulations, are the chances that the eye of this hurricane in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico will pass over New Orleans? Well, the correct answer, I think, will either be 10% or 100%, depending on whether the referent of hurricane is to a meteorological type, in which case the correct answer is 10%, or whether it's to the particular token physical realization of this type, in which case the correct answer is 100% certain it's going to pass through New Orleans. Now, the correct answer is 100% in this latter case because the non-trivial objective chance of a particular future event implies an openness of the future which is lacking whenever this event supervenes on a lower level of events that's governed by deterministic laws. Now, perhaps for some scientific purposes, the relevant chance will be the 10% chance of the meteorological type passing through New Orleans. Now, that fact might be relevant to policymakers who need to decide how much money to spend on strengthening the levees of New Orleans versus spending it on other projects. But for the purpose of figuring out how much effort a resident should now make to flee the city and whether they should seek refuge, surely the chance of a particular token physical realization are the relevant odds. I think this provides further support for the claim that we should seek the narrower reference class.
I didn't follow that last. You say?
Sorry?
You say that residents of New Orleans should refer to something they don't know? Is that
well, right, so if they don't know, then obviously they can't.
Nobody knows, right? That's right.
Yeah, right. So I mean, Laplacian demons revealing what exactly will happen to this particular token instance of a hurricane is consistent with hurricanes of this type having a 10% chance. So you're right. I have to assume that the demon tells them this particular hurricane is going to pass through New Orleans. It's still the case that hurricanes of this type have a 10% chance, which is relevant to public policy questions. But if you're the resident, you're going to be caring about this particular token instance. Okay.
So what? But it doesn't have anything to do with what you're going to do.
Sorry?
This token instance has no, the information about this token instance, it has nothing to do with what you know or what you're going to do. Right?
Sorry, no, you're right. I mean, it's only if you know, so if this is revealed to you, in that case, you're not going to think, oh, well, actually, it remains true that hurricanes of this type, this meteorological type, have 10% chance.
If some Laplacian demon revealed this to me, I would really wonder whether Laplacian demon was up. Why didn't he tell me what I was going to do also?
Oh, well, it may be.
This thought experiment makes no sense to me.
All right, so I suppose the issue is, well, I suppose, so one question we have as well, was there any chance? I mean, when we think, perhaps it'll make more sense when we make reference to particular runnings of the lottery. Okay, so even if you don't know enough to know whether the coin will land heads or tails, just as in, what's relevant to whether you're going to win the lottery is whether the particular token instance will land heads or tails, and that's going to have either 100% chance of landing heads or 100% chance of landing tails, and therefore, insofar as what you're concerned with, any odds other than 100 or 0 are merely epistemic, and that's the sort of underlying point I want to make. So, in this particular case, you're right. The Laplacian demon would have to sort of intervene and tell you for you to know that you should definitely flee, and you probably don't know any more information other than that. Well, actually, at this point, you don't know any more information than there's a 10% chance of it's hitting New Orleans. Okay. Now, so what I want to do now is turn to questions about how this bears on the case for running lotteries, if in fact we assume this deterministic background. Okay. Well, suppose that we know that those who are charged to distribute goods will scrupulously refrain from acting in biased fashion. There's one reason, even if we think determinism is true, why we should run lotteries, is it prevents people from being able to just pick in unfair, biased, partial fashion. Okay. But suppose that we know that those who are charged to distribute goods will scrupulously refrain from acting in biased fashion. Now, I think even if it's impossible to distribute objectively equal chances of an indivisible good, where these chances are non-trivial, greater than 0, less than 1, I think there remains the following reason of fairness to insist that people with equal claims, going back to my original NHS example, how do you just decide how to allocate this medicine? There remains the following reason of fairness to insist that people with equal claims to an indivisible good be given the merely epistemically equal chances that a lottery might provide, rather than chances that are neither epistemically nor objectively equal. The distribution of such lottery tickets that confers merely epistemically equal chances is a fair distribution to those with equal claims because it's a distribution of things that it's rational for each person to place positive and equal value upon. We have an equal distribution across persons in the following respect. For any given person, the value that it's rational to place on one's ticket is equal to that of any other ticket insofar as one has no rational grounds prior to the revelation of the winning number to swap one's ticket with anyone else's ticket. In other words, what Ronald Dworkin refers to as the Walrasian envy test is satisfied. No one wants to swap his ticket with anyone else's ticket. It doesn't mean that the tickets are of equal expected utility for each. They may be more valuable for one person than the other, but there's equality in that no one has any grounds to swap his ticket with anyone else.
What is that an assumption you're making?
I think it's not a stipulation. I think it's true.
Well, then it's an assumption. It's not true, right? It can't. It might not always be true. Right? There's apparently, I guess what I'm trying to understand is you have I understand there's an epistemic stance you might have, which is that they're all equal. But when in fact one of them is guaranteed to be it and the other isn't, that's an objective.
Right.
That's separating those two. But in reality, there might be something in between there that I epistemically hold a position between everything being equal and, right?
Right, okay,
And
yeah.
so if I'm in that position, this,
All right, so yeah, so I'm building into this particular case that the lottery tickets are such that no one can distinguish any one lottery ticket from any other lottery ticket.
okay, so there's an assumption that the people involved in the lottery don't have any additional, nobody has, knowledge or thinks they have knowledge that would change.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so the equal chances that everyone thinks that each lottery ticket confers on him, the non-zero one equal chance that everyone thinks each lottery ticket confers is a merely epistemically equal chance. Now, a merely epistemically equal chance of a good is something that's rational to place positive value on, where the value is an increasing function of the epistemic chance that one will receive this good. So let's imagine a particular lottery, to try to make this a bit vivid. Imagine a case of a lottery with a £1 million jackpot. Actually, £1 million isn't worth that much these days with Brexit and currency devaluation, but in any event, it's not trivial. Imagine a case of a lottery with a £1 million jackpot. Suppose that the winning lottery ticket has been determined before that ticket and the other losing tickets are distributed. To make this vivid, let's suppose that these tickets take the form of scratch cards. So whenever the ticket is a winner or a loser, so whether the ticket's a winner or loser is printed on the ticket itself, and you have to sort of scratch off the opaque coding. Now suppose further that the tickets have been allocated, say by means of a deterministic computer program. Now here the ticket that one has been allocated is either definitely a winner or definitely a loser, and the W over N chance, where W is the number of winning cards and the total number of cards printed the ticket one holds as a winner, is purely epistemic. The odds of any one ticket's winning are epistemically, but not also objectively equal to the odds of any other ticket's winning. It is rational to assign positive value to each of these tickets, the losing one as well as the winning ticket, as is shown by the fact that it's rational to buy and sell these tickets for money or other things of tangible, concrete value. If, for example, one owns a ticket that one knows to be part of a print run of only 2, one would be prudent to place it in a safe deposit box and refuse to sell it for anything other than a very large sum of money. Probably not £500,000, but I don't know, maybe you'd hold out for anything less than £250,000. That would be your sort of certainty equivalent, say, for exchanging this lottery ticket. Now, that's an argument for why it is that even if it's a consequence of the assumed truth of determinism that in the case of these lotteries, all trivial, non-trivial, non-zero one chances are merely epistemic. I mean, my argument is, well, you still have reason to run a lottery above and beyond the fact that it ensures that the allocator can't choose in biased fashion, which is that that running a lottery actually manages to distribute something of genuinely equal value among those with equal claims. Now what I want to do is raise an objection to this argument for running lotteries that distribute only epistemically equal chances. The claim that the equalization of nothing more than the epistemic chances of good is the equalization of something of genuine value is vulnerable to the following challenge. So consider the following case. Suppose that one of us is fated to recover fully and the other is fated to die from a disease, and we also both know which of us is fated to recover and who's fated to die. Therefore, one of us has both an epistemically and objectively 0 chance of surviving, and the other has both an epistemically and objectively 100% chance of surviving. Now let's suppose, however, that as a result of the natural release of a strange and fantastic amnesia-inducing gas from the depths of the earth, a veil of ignorance now descends upon us, which deprives us of knowledge of who will live and who will die, but without depriving us of knowledge that one of us will live and one of us will die. The veil therefore confers on each of us an epistemic 50% chance of survival, though one of us will still possess the objectively 0 and the other the objectively 100% chance of survival. Now, I'm committed to the claim that the descent of this veil makes things fairer because it constitutes an egalitarian redistribution of the formerly unequal 100-0 distribution of our epistemic chances. This redistribution, this veil, into an equal distribution of something that is rational to value highly, namely an epistemic 50% chance of survival. Now, one might question this claim, as it seems odd to maintain that our being rendered ignorant of our fates by this veil amounts to an equal distribution of something that's rational to value highly. So how, one might ask, can the person who's fated to die be benefited by the formation of the justified belief there is a 50% chance of survival, where the justification of this belief is based on the fact that he's been rendered ignorant of what he once knew about his fate? Now, paradoxical as it may sound, the claim that he comes into the possession of something that it's rational for him to value highly can, I think, be supported by the following observation. So let's modify the example a little bit. Suppose that the person who's not doomed to die is fated to recover only on condition that he consumes a vitamin C pill or some sort of vitamin pill every morning. Suppose that each person knows this, that if he's the one who's fated to live, he'll live just in case he consumes his vitamin pills. Since the veil ensures that neither of us know who's conditionally, upon consuming this vitamin pill every day, fated to recover, we would each go to considerable effort and expense to make sure that we consume this vitamin pill each morning. We would, for example, travel to a foreign country if that's necessary to replenish our vitamin supply and so forth. Now, this demonstrates that we regard it as very important not to lose, and therefore highly value, the merely epistemic 50% chance of surviving. Moreover, such a stance would be rational. Now, one might be misled into rejecting the claim that the descent of the veil makes things fair because one believes that one shouldn't welcome a veil which merely equalizes epistemic chances on the grounds that such a veil would deprive us of something which is good, namely the knowledge which we once possessed of whether we would live or die.
This is not an objection, it's just a question, but am I correct to understand that you're making some kind of free will exception to your determinism?
No. So, I mean, what do you think I'm making a free will exception?
Oh, because whether you decide to take this aspirin or something makes a difference.
Okay, well, I'm assuming that the choices you make can make a difference. I mean, I'll say a little bit about how we should distinguish determinism from fatalism in a bit. I mean, I think that distinction may be relevant. But even if determinism is true, even if that deprives us of the ability to do other than what we do, it doesn't make it the case that what we choose to do makes no difference. So I'm surely whether you choose to consume a pill, even if you couldn't have chosen otherwise, will make a difference to whether you end up living or dying, if in fact you're fated to live in the event that you consume a pill. I mean, there are interesting questions about how we make sense of deliberation. Determinism is true, but I'll I may be happy to discuss this in the discussion afterwards if they're relevant. So you might be misled into rejecting the claim that the descent of the veil makes things fairer because one believes that one shouldn't welcome a veil which merely equalizes epistemic chance on the grounds that the veil would deprive us of something which is good, namely the knowledge which we once possessed of whether we'll live or die. Now, this knowledge might be regarded as instrumentally good because it allows us to plan our lives effectively and so forth. I mean, would, for example, this knowledge of who's fated to live or die save the individual who's fated to die the inefficacious and potentially costly hassle of ensuring that he consumes a vitamin pill each day? The knowledge of whether one is fated to die prematurely might also be regarded as intrinsically good. Such condemnation of the veil for depriving us of knowledge is, however, perfectly consistent with the claim that its descent would make things fairer. The promotion of the value of fairness is consistent with the loss of some other value, for example, the good of knowledge, which might well be a greater loss than this gain in fairness. Now, the thing I want to emphasize now is that I am saying that descent of the veil makes things fairer, but what I want to say is that there's a further question whether we should impose the veil for the sake of fairness. Sorry, did you have a...
Maybe it's related to this, but I guess I'm wrestling with this concept of what it means to make something fairer. I mean, so is fairness an objective notion, or is it just an epistemic concept that something seems to be more fair as a result of the veil, or that something actually is more fair?
Right. So, I mean, what I want to say is that among those with equal claims, a more equal distribution of things of value makes things fairer, and it's rational for people to value these epistemic chances highly and equally. So it's that you're equalizing that which it's rational for people to value. That's the increase in fairness.
If I'm understanding you right, things are equal in one way, is that each gets the same epistemic probability of an outcome, but they're unequal in another way. One of them will live, the other one will die.
That's right. Yeah.
So why is the one relevant rather than the other one relevant? Or, I mean,
Right.
one might have think, and this is the problem that you seem to want to deal with, why isn't what will actually happen the relevant distribution?
Right. So it's certainly much less fair than if you'd actually equalize the outcomes. So I grant that we're not going to realize perfect fairness, but it's not as unfair as if you just simply chose one person, say the person you like best, or you chose, even if not in biased fashion, in a way which didn't give people an equal chance. So what we want to say is that, well, the fact that the outcomes, of death versus life will be so different is this unfairness that's not eliminated by the
So
law.
what is it about chances that makes that so?
That makes it well. The fact. So what I want to say is that that it's rational for people to value the chances highly, and to say be indifferent between, say in our scratch card lottery case, even though it's merely an epistemic chance of 50% chance of £1 million. And it's already written on the card whether you won or lost. I mean, it has that card has there's a certain certainty of a certain sum of money between 0 and £1 million, which is rational to be indifferent between plus and that lottery ticket.
So I'm asking a more foundational question.
Okay.
Everybody would agree with that,
Right.
but why?
Well,
What is it about these things, either objective chances or these not knowing what's going on, degrees of belief? What is it that makes that the case?
so
You can choose not to answer because it's...
yeah. Well, I ought to have an answer. So, do you think it makes a difference whether the chances are epistemic versus objective, as to whether it makes sense to value this, say, 50% chance?
Yeah, I think it makes a difference in this sense. The arguments I'd give would be a bit different in either case.
Okay.
And a lot depends on what I think objective chances are. But you don't want to get into that now, but at dinner we can get into that.
Okay, sure.
But with respect to epistemic chances, epistemic probabilities, they would be the same for a variety of views about objective chance.
Okay.
Okay. There, I think there might be some argument starting from some principles of rationality for why you should. I don't see that that's going to hold in the objective chance. So I think it's easier to go the road you're going down with epistemic than with physical.
Okay, I suppose that one could, I'm not really, I'm a bit hesitant to, one could appeal to sort of von Neumann Morgenstern axioms to try to motivate the view that objective, that chances in lotteries are of value. So perhaps, for the time being, perhaps might just say that there's some argument along those lines.
Yeah, that goes for epistemic.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But there'd still be a gap if it was objective probabilities to how to go from them to apply the von Neumann Morgenstern argument.
Right, yeah, okay. But yeah, so let's say, so at least in the case of the epistemic chances, let's just suppose that there, I mean, so one argument could be the appeal of unknowing Morgenstern axioms. I also just think it's, I don't know, I mean, I suppose I wasn't expecting a challenge to the claim that, you know, it's rational to be unwilling to to exchange an epistemic chance for something other than a high sum of money. Okay, but you're right. I ought to be able to say more. Okay.
I have another question.
Sure.
Maybe this is kind of, you started out with this word fairness, as if we were talking about someone's action or behavior being fair to others.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's also the sense of fairness as whether outcomes are fair.
Right.
And there's a sense of fairness as to whether a situation leading those outcomes is fair.
Right.
And those seem to be different things, and I'm not quite clear which of the three, if I can distinguish those three you're talking about.
Okay, right, so I'm thinking that the question is whether there are reasons of fairness to distribute a good by lottery. Okay, and it could depend on more than one of these different factors you've identified. One is there are considerations having to do with the partiality or impartiality of the allocator, whether the allocator acts in biased fashion. But there are also reasons of fairness that the allocator has that have to do with the equalization of the value of the goods among those with equal claims. That'd be, I don't quite remember the distinction between the second and the third sense of fairness you drew, but it would be either the second or the third and not the first. And what I'm doing is trying to motivate an argument that
My third was just the outcome, whether that's fair.
Oh, the outcome, not the chances, right? Is that the third?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the second, it sounds like it's the second one I'm focusing on now. Even though the outcomes aren't the same, the allocator is trying to give equal claimants something of equal value, namely these equal chances.
That sort of refinement of what fair might mean is something you take as given. That's not up for discussion.
Yeah, well, so I'm just trying to build in a case where the people have equal claims, right? And then to a good, such as medicine, and then asking, well, can we satisfy their equal claims in the case where the good's indivisible? Of course, I mean, one way to satisfy the equal claims is by giving neither of them the medicine. That ensures perfect fairness, but at the cost, obviously, of both people dying. And then the question is, well, are there grounds of fairness to distribute by lottery? Okay, even though it's going to guarantee, I mean, an unequal outcome, which is very important. And I want to say that, yeah, there are reasons of fairness. You are distributing something of high and equal value, namely these epistemic chances. Yeah.
And just as a quick follow-up, because you just mentioned the motivating example was the distribution of an indivisible good. But the veil of ignorance example seems like we're talking about two people's lives, which are, I think, to be divisible. We're talking about the good of the life for one person and the good of the life for the other person. So I was wondering whether or not the indivisibility is a precondition for talking about fairness, or is that just an artifact of the condition of the motivation?
Yeah, so I suppose that the indivisibility is a reason you have to run the lottery. Okay, and then the lottery gives us, in this deterministic set, merely epistemically equal non-trivial chances. And then the question is, well, are these of value? I want to say that giving people epistemically equal chances of goods that they value highly is something of value. And then the challenge was, well then, do we have reason to impose veils of ignorance? That just seems to be a bit odd. Okay, Now, I was saying in the last slide that if the veil of ignorance just happens to descend naturally, it does make things fairer. But then the question that I was about to raise, or the point I was about to make, is that it's a further question whether, all things considered, we should impose a veil in order to deprive us of knowledge of what will happen to people. So even apart from the reasons against imposing the veil that I mentioned earlier regarding the value of knowledge that the veil would deprive us of, there's a following reason why the imposition of such a veil would be pointless because of inefficacious. So what I want to suggest is that there's something more to the case for running lotteries in a deterministic setup than that it results in the equal distribution of something of value.
I mean, sure, maybe this is your point, maybe this way, but imagine someone who said, I have a great political idea. What I'm going to do is we live in this incredibly unequal society, but I have this drug, and it'll make everybody forget what they own for 15 minutes.
Right, yeah.
Okay? And everybody thinks that they own the same thing, and we'll not have a fair society.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think so. James Fishkin has this case of we're in this very unequal society where the family into which you're born makes a big difference, and then we just randomly swap people in the cradle, and as if that makes things fair. Right. So I think that
That's a better, at least you have a chance of getting into a good family.
You're exactly
my
right.
story, all you do is you become ignorant of.
You're exactly you're right. So yeah, yours is a good example of how it is that we need to add something more to explain why it is that we have reasons of fairness to distribute things by lottery, even if they only distribute epistemically equal chances. The mere fact that epistemic chances are equalized need not confer any benefit at all.
So if I'm following, you're taking it for granted that if it was real, whatever you think, real indeterministic chance, then we'd have a notion of fairness, and we're not even worried about why equal chances would be worthwhile. It would be worthwhile for people to have equal chances for the same outcome. You're taking that for granted, and then looking at, but suppose determinism is true. Well, then ignorance must have something to do with what's valuable. But if you start thinking about it, you run into a puzzle like the one I just mentioned.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I agree that there's this puzzle. Why does the fact of mere ignorance confer something of equal value? Now, I don't think that it's unproblematic what the case is for distributing objectively equal chances, but I'll say a bit about objective chances towards the end of this talk. What I'm going to say is that from the prudential point of view, it makes no difference whether your chances are mere epistemic or objective chances, but from the point of view of fairness, it does actually make things fairer to be able to distribute objectively equal rather than merely epistemically equal chances. Okay, but so even apart from the fact that lowering the veil deprives us of knowledge, which is valuable, there's the following reason why the imposition of such a veil would be pointless because of inefficacious. Although it would render things fairer by distributing epistemic chances that would be rational for each to value equally and highly, lowering the veil would do so in a manner that we know will make no material difference to anyone's fate. So it's unlike the case of swapping people, you're right, at the cradle. That does make a material difference, but in your case it makes no material difference to anyone's fate. Prior to lowering the veil, the person who knows that he's fated to live also knows that lowering the veil will not and cannot change his fate for the worse. Rather, it will merely make him forget that he's fated to live. Similarly, the person who knows that he's fated to die also knows that lowering the veil will not and cannot change his fate for the better. Rather, it will merely make him forget that he's fated to die. Now, the point I want to make now is that it's not essential to this complaint regarding the pointless inefficacy of the veil that it makes us forget what we once knew. For we can imagine that the lowering of a veil that doesn't erase any knowledge that we once possessed. Rather, imagine that this veil prevents us from coming to know what we would otherwise come to know. So more precisely, suppose this veil makes it the case that we will not come to know something which we don't yet know, but we would eventually come to know if the veil weren't lowered. So that we're eventually going to come to know who's fated to live and who's fated to die unless this veil is lowered. Now, as before, such a lowering of the veil would make no material difference to anyone's fate. It just makes us not learn who's fated to live and who to die. Now I want to suggest that there is the following explanation for why the imposition of such veils that prevents us from knowing of people's fates is inferior to the allocation of goods by means of a lottery. That the outcome of a lottery in a deterministic universe involves merely epistemic, non-trivial chances is implied by the fact that it's in principle possible for the Laplacian demon to infer the outcome. In this sense, the running of a lottery in a deterministic universe may seem akin to the lowering of a veil that makes it the case that human beings don't know who's fated to live and die, in contrast to this Laplacian demon whose vision can pierce the veil. Unlike the lowering of the veil, the institution of a lottery is, however, counterfactually difference-making, insofar as who ends up with the good is concerned. People receive goods that they would not have received if the lottery had not been run. This is true even if, given the truth of determinism, it was physically impossible that things had been otherwise. Now, there are some notorious difficulties, which I'm going to set to one side for the moment, in making sense of counterfactuals when it's assumed that the universe is deterministic. Let's assume that we have some grip on counterfactuals, what would have happened otherwise, even in deterministic universes. Okay, so people receive goods that they would not have received if the lottery had not been run. This is true even if, given the truth of determinism, it was physically impossible if things had been otherwise. By contrast, lowering a veil makes no difference to who ends up with the goods concerned in comparison with the counterfactual in which the veil is not lowered. Okay, yeah.
What is the alternative to not running the lottery? Does it just mean nobody gets anything?
Yeah, so I'll mention a case in which that's the alternative. I'll mention a case in which there are a couple different alternatives to running the lottery. So one alternative is just not allocating the good at all. Another alternative is just sort of choosing one person, like the first great grandson of the Queen or something like that. Okay.
Okay. And I guess one more question, which is that in terms of the veil not changing, what does it say? It doesn't make a difference with who ends up with the goods, right?
Right.
But the veil actually does confer something, right? I mean, if I'm going to die, I'd probably rather, maybe I'd rather know about it, or maybe I'd actually rather not know about it. It would make the remaining time better, right?
Right,
so
yeah.
there is a, it does change something, right? It does.
Yeah,
have
it
an
doesn't.
effect.
Yeah, so right. I say it makes no material difference. Which it makes no difference to whether you live or die. But
Sure.
you're right. It does make it. It does. Knowledge and ignorance have values, and so you are able to confer, and those are things of genuine value, right? Not having to live under the dread of knowing you're going to die early, or knowing this so you can plan. I mean, those are things of value which the veil could confer. But I'm saying that there's something missing that doesn't fully explain why it is that we run lotteries, because there's this further thing which that lotteries are difference making, which lowerings of the veil are not, in terms of the sort of outcomes of sort of life or death in this particular case. It's one thing to create a scratch card lottery that makes a difference to how goods are distributed, and another thing to simply render our chances of receiving goods epistemically equal by depriving us of the possession or the formation of the knowledge of who is already fated to receive the good and who not. So rather than a random difference-making distribution of goods of a genuine lottery, the lowering of the veil is a mere charade or pretense of a lottery. Now, I was something about determinism versus fatalism, which something I mentioned earlier. The difference between determinism and fatalism may shed some light on the difference between a genuine lottery and the lowering of the veil. So fatalism is the view that whatever act one chooses to perform, the same outcome will result. Now, determinism is sometimes confused with fatalism, but the mere fact that all events are necessitated by the past and the laws, and therefore in principle predictable, doesn't imply that whatever I choose to do the same outcome will result. So just as in an indeterministic universe, different choices in a deterministic universe will often have very different outcomes. I mean, whether or not determinism is true, if I choose to board the train to my right on the platform, I'll end up somewhere different than if I choose to board the train to my left. It's probably not always the case for New York City's subway, but anyway, in a train platform. Similarly, whether or not determinism is true, running a lottery will give rise to a different distribution of goods. If, by contrast, fatalism were true, such that whether or not we choose to run a lottery, goods will always end up in the same hands, then it seems that running a lottery would also seem to be like a mere charade. There'd be something meretricious about an equalization of epistemic chances in a manner that never makes a difference to who ends up with what. The lowering of a veil never makes a difference to who ends up with what. It only deprives us of knowledge of people's fates. Now, the difference between a lottery and the lowering of a veil can be illustrated by consideration of a case involving the allocation of a life-saving resource by lot, where in the absence of a decision, nobody will be saved. And this gets back to your question, what's the alternative to running the lottery? Let's illustrate by way of example. Whoops, yeah, right, let's, here the attempt to allocate in a manner that gives each an epistemically equal chance is not an attempt to, okay, sorry, I'm just, okay, so the difference between a lottery and the lowering of a veil can be illustrated by consideration of a case involving the allocation of a life-saving resource by law, where in the absence of a decision, nobody will be saved. Here, the attempt to allocate in a manner that gives each an epistemically equal chance is not an attempt to create value by the depriving us of knowledge of who's fated to live or die. There is here no person fated to die about whom we're being rendered ignorant in this lottery example. Rather, in the absence of our doing anything, all will die and none will be saved. Our choosing whom to save by lot, rather than, say, selecting the Queen's youngest great-grandchild, gives rise to chances which are merely epistemically equal, but not also objectively equal, given these assumptions I introduced earlier regarding the truth and consequences of determinism. But the epistemically equal chances are not created by means of the lowering of a veil that deprives us of knowledge of the predetermined fates of individuals. Rather, the epistemically equal chances are created by means of the adoption of a randomizing procedure which makes the difference that somebody, rather than nobody, or the monarch's youngest great-grandchild, will live. And the point I've just made goes through even if we assume that the decision to hold a lottery has been causally determined. The fact that in such a deterministic universe, a Laplacian demon already knows before our births that a lottery will be chosen and who the lottery will select doesn't obliterate the clear material difference to life and death that this lottery makes.
So it sounds that your picture is that the lottery is not just the lottery is run, but the lottery is run in a public way that people know what is happening. It wouldn't be the same if the lottery were run in secret and you just announced what you were doing.
I suppose, I mean, it would still make a difference, you know, I mean, it would still, I think that,
My other alternative was, what if it were a fraudulent lottery that would give everybody this, give them their epistemic, if they didn't know it was fraudulent, that would give them their epistemic values.
yeah, I mean, there's an interesting question. One of the Laplacian demons is running the lottery, and he knows, you know, which ticket is winning and which ticket is losing. And that I mean, raises some interesting questions.
But these are not Laplacian demon kind of questions. These are things that could really happen in life.
Okay, right, yeah.
You could run a lottery in secret and not tell people that's the way you were doing it, or you could pretend to run a lottery and convince people it was a fair lottery.
Yeah, so to take your first question, I think conferring epistemically equal chances of a lottery does confer something of value, even if the people don't know that they've been given these lottery tickets, right? I mean, it's a bit like, I mean, so.
And in the second case, it does not. If you convince them that it's fraudulent, that does not confer.
Yeah, I don't want to, yeah, I want to resist the claim that it would confer something about, I mean, so there's no good that's distributed, let's say, in this fraudulent lottery. And
No, but it's fraudulent that you've done a lottery. You already decided you were going to give it to the
all right, yeah.
to the grandson.
Yeah,
Everybody's got their epistemic value.
So there, yeah, you're right. So here, I think what's wrong. One thing that's wrong with the lottery is not difference making, right? As opposed to a genuine lottery. I mean, you say you've run a lottery, but this quote lottery makes no difference to who gets the good. Okay, and right in this fraudulent case.
No, that's just like deterministic. It doesn't make any difference anyway.
Well, I mean, even if determinism is true, whether you run the lottery or not can make a difference to who ends up with the good. But in this fraudulent lottery case, it doesn't make a difference. So I think what I'm appealing to about the difference between a lottery and a veil may actually help explain what's wrong with your fraudulent lottery. So let me just, I mean, I don't have too much, let me just press on. So what points I want to make are first that I think prudential value tracks epistemic rather than objective chances. Then I'll make a point about how I think fairness, it makes a difference to fairness whether the chances are objective versus merely epistemic. Okay, so insofar as one's self-interest is concerned, I believe that individuals should be rationally indifferent between a merely epistemic chance n between 0 and 1 combined with either a 0 or a 1 objective chance, and this chance n between 0 and 1 as both epistemic and objective. So in other words, people shouldn't accept a lowering of the value of the good they may end up with in exchange for a move from a merely epistemic chance n to an objective as well as an epistemic chance n. At best, one might embrace the objective as well as the epistemic chance as a tiebreaker. Just to illustrate this point, consider this case involving urns. Suppose that you're going to die unless you consume a pill that will cure your condition. You're deliberating between a pill drawn from an urn and a different pill that I'll describe in a moment. You're told that the pill drawn from the urn has been selected by mechanical arm from a well-mixed urn of 100 pills, half of which are placebos, which will have no effect, and the other half of which will completely cure you. So this pill is drawn from this urn already, therefore has a 50% chance of curing you, but in the case of this already drawn pill, the 50% chance is merely epistemic. I mean, the one that's been drawn is either certain to cure you or certain to have no effect. And you're told something about the other pill. You're told that the other pill, by contrast, will cure you in the event that its chemicals interact in a given manner after you've ingested it. And there is, moreover, an objective 50% chance that the chemicals will interact in this fortuitous manner. Otherwise, the pill will be just as worthless as the placebo. Now, it's hard to see what grounds you would have, in this case, to choose this objectively 50% chancy pill over the pill that's been drawn from the urn. The high 100% versus low 0% objective probability that the different pills from the urn will cure you completely seem to balance each other out, prudentially speaking, in a manner that renders such a pill from the urn equivalent to the objectively 50% chancy pill, at least from the point of view of prudence. So, I mean, if we stipulate that the pill from the urn has now been drawn from an urn of 49 placebos and 51 cures, I think that should tip the balance in favor of choosing the pill from the urn. Now it's got a 51%, even though merely epistemic, chance of curing you, as opposed to the 50% but objectively chancy pill. But as I'll explain in a moment, when, however, these 0 or 100% objective probabilities are spread out over different people, rather than being different possible futures of a single person, this gives rise to an unfairness which provides a morally motivated third party with reason to distribute 50% chancy pills to groups of people rather than the pills from the urn with merely objectively rather than also, merely epistemic rather than also objective 50% chances. So let me just explain why I think that we've got more reason to, of fairness to distribute objective chances as opposed to merely epistemic chances. The equalization of merely epistemic chances of survival makes things fairer insofar as the equalization of something that is rational for each to value highly, for the reasons I gave earlier in this talk, but it doesn't make things perfectly fair. I mean, one thing Barry mentioned earlier, doesn't, for example, equalize outcomes. People will still suffer the huge brute luck inequality of some dying while others live. Moreover, as I shall now suggest, the equalization of merely epistemic chances is less fair than the equalization of objective as well as epistemic chances of survival. The running of a deterministic lottery doesn't eliminate the genuine unfairness of the objectively unequal chances of survival of the parties. I think the following considerations support the claim that the objectively unequal chances of survival of the two parties is by that fact unfair even when their epistemic chances are equal. And this is the argument, other things equal, it's better to be in a position in which one is objectively fated to receive a good than one in which one stands only an objective chance between 0 and 100% of receiving a good, which is in turn better than being in a position in which one is objectively fated not to receive the good. Since it's better, other things equal, for someone to have a higher objective chance for something good rather than a lower one, then it would be better for someone with an epistemic 50% chance of survival to also have an objective 50% chance rather than an objective 0% chance of survival. And it would be worse for someone with an epistemic 50% chance of survival to have an objective 50% chance rather than an objective 100% chance of survival.
So to make sure I'm following you, so you're saying this, that given a choice between winning $1,000 with an objective chance of 0.9 or winning $1,000 with a, whatever you want to call it, epistemic chance of 0.9 under such circumstances, it's better to choose the first than the second.
Actually, so, I mean, as I was just saying this, I was wondering whether I'm actually, what I'm saying is actually consistent with what I said in the last slide.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that what I've just been saying, I mean, I still think that so I want it to be the case that these respects in which things are better or worse don't give you reason to prefer. I'm trying to. So it could be that. So I'll just leave open that it could be that the arguments I'm offering here give you reason to prefer the chancy 50-50 pill in my last slide.
By chance you mean objectively chancy?
Yeah, the objectively 50-50 chancy pill versus the pill drawn from the urn where there's 51% epistemic chance.
I can see a reason to prefer it, but it'll hold under just special circumstances. The reason is that in the epistemic case, you could be worried that you might be frustrated or thwarted by somebody who's, going to undermine you. They know more, and so that you're going to trick you. And we think that that's not going to be able to happen in the objective chance.
Right. Okay.
But there are plenty of situations that one might describe in which it's really what you call epistemic, in which we also can know that we can't be thwarted.
Okay.
In fact, our laws are like that.
Yeah. So I wanted. So you're right. Let's try to just sort of bracket the greater manipulability of epistemic as opposed to objective lotteries. So even when we just assume that the epistemic lotteries can't be manipulated. So I want to say that, and I'm not sure whether, I just want to, mention why I think distributing objectively equal chances is fairer than merely epistemically equal chances, and it may be that the argument I offer is also an argument for you're having more prudential reason to prefer an objectively equal rather than merely epistemically equal chance. So this is the claim. So the following considerations support the claim that the objectively unequal chances of survival of the two parties is unfair if it's a 0 or 100%, even when their epistemic chances are equal. So other things equal, it's better to be in a position in which one is objectively fated. I mean, this just seems to be true. Other things equal, it's better to be in a position in which one is objectively fated to receive a good Okay, yeah, I think I now know why I want to draw this distinction between the prudential and the and interpersonal fairness. So other things equal, it's better to be in a position in which one is objectively fated to receive a good than one in which one stands only an objective chance between 0 and 100% of receiving a good, which is in turn better than being in a position in which one is fated not to receive the good. Since it's better, other things equal, for someone to have a higher objective chance for something good rather than a lower one, then it would be better for someone with an epistemic 50% chance of survival to have an objective 50% chance rather than an objective 0 chance of survival. It would be worse for someone with an epistemic 50% chance of survival to have an objective 50% chance rather than an objective 100% chance of survival. Therefore, if each has an objective 50% chance of living, that would give rise to a fairer because more equal distribution of burdens. And I think the difference between this and the prudential case is that, well, I mean, at least when it's a 50-50 chance, basically, you know that in the epistemic case, either you're fated to live or you're fated to die, and you don't know which is which, and so you don't know whether things are going to push in the better versus the worse direction, as opposed to having this objectively chancy 50% chance. I think that's why it shouldn't really make a difference, whereas there is more that's equalized across people in that what's distributed is of more equal value if the chances are objectively 50%, not merely epistemically 50% chance, and that gives rise to fairness across people, even though I don't think this factor plays a role in prudential choices. Okay, now, one might challenge the distinction I've just drawn between objective and epistemic chances as follows. Suppose that you end up losing a 50-50 coin toss, in which the odds were objectively equal all the way down because the trajectory of the coin had been rigged to track the indeterministic movements of a subatomic particle. Suppose that you lose a 50-50 objectively chancy coin toss, so we're no longer assuming determinism. What, one might ask, makes this objective coin toss that you lose any fairer than a merely epistemic 50-50 coin toss that you're fated by causally deterministic laws to lose? Does it really make a difference that in the deterministic case your losing is causally necessitated and hence you could not win, whereas it's merely a contingent fact that you lose in the indeterministic case and hence you could have won in that case? Well, I think it does make a difference because the objectively 50-50 coin toss presents a genuine possibility of a benefit as it's not yet settled before the coin toss whether it will land heads or tails. Now here I'm embracing an Aristotelian account of future contingents, according to which it's either true or false that P, where P describes some future contingent event, but it's not yet settled whether P is true or false before the event occurs. Now this particular account is, I believe, incompatible with eternalism about time, but compatible with bivalence and the law of excluded middle. Now I just want to wrap up with the presentation of a paradox involving open counterfactuals. Just a bit of some weirdness I'm going to introduce before wrapping up. There are cases in which the openness of the counterfactual gives rise to an indeterminacy which would underpin counterfactual equal chances that are more than merely epistemic, even if the universe is deterministic. Now, an interesting upshot is that if in a deterministic world in which I refrain from giving each an epistemically equal chance by selecting by lot, then had I done otherwise and run a lottery, there's a sense in which each would have had an objectively equal chance of having his name drawn, given the openness of the counterfactual. And let me just explain what I'm talking about with a simple example. Suppose that there are two people, A and B, with an equally strong claim to an indivisible life-saving resource. Suppose that, unfairly, I simply choose one of them rather than drawing names by lot from an urn. Now, in this case, even if the universe is deterministic, had I done what I ought to have done, had I run the lottery instead of simply choosing the one I prefer, well, the following is true. There's an equal number of relatively close possible worlds in which I draw A's name and in which I draw B's name. Now it follows from determinism, the laws of nature, that in each possible world in which I draw a person's name, he had a 100% objective chance of having his name drawn, and the other person a 0 objective chance. Nevertheless, the equality of the number of possible worlds in which I draw A's name, in which I draw B's name, is an objective fact about possible worlds, rather than an epistemic fact having to do with lack of knowledge. I mean, there are an equal number of equally close possible worlds in which, when I run the lottery, I choose A's name and I choose B's name. And this is sort of an objective fact about the sort of the nature of these possible worlds. It's not a matter of ignorance. So there's a sense in which I deprive people of objectively as well as epistemically equal chances if I fail to run a lottery in a deterministic universe. And this sense is captured by the truth of the following claim. If I'd run a lottery, then, I mean, I chose someone unfairly, just chose the person who I preferred. Had I run a lottery, then in half of the possible worlds in which I had run the lottery, A would have been chosen, and half the possible worlds in which I run the lottery, B would have been chosen. But if, however, I do as I ought, by running the lottery, I'm not able to do more than provide people with epistemically equal chances. I cannot provide them with objectively equal chances in any sense, given the assumptions of determinism that I've been arguing for earlier. Now, I argued earlier that equal objective as well as epistemic chances are fairer than merely epistemically equal chances. So it may appear to follow that whenever I run a lottery in a deterministic universe, I ought to have done otherwise by running a different lottery, perhaps simply by running the same lottery differently, by, for example, reaching into a different part of the urn where people's names are on balls. It may appear to follow that I ought to have done other than I did, because had I done otherwise, then I would have conferred objective as well as merely epistemic chances. But this isn't something I can actually do. This is because if I actually run the lottery, then its outcome will be deterministic. It's only if I had run a lottery that I didn't actually run that chances would be objectively as well as epistemically equal in the sense I've been describing. So that putatively fair because counterfactual lottery involving objectively equal chances is not something that I should bring about because I can't, and ought implies can. It's rather something I ought to have brought about, and that's sort of the paradox. I think this paradox can be resolved by noting that the case I made for the greater fairness of objectively rather than merely epistemically equal chances requires objectively equal chances in the actual world that the equal claimants jointly inhabit. Such equal chances, I mean, I've been maintaining, are excluded by determinism. The greater equality to which I pointed, if everyone having the same objective chance of receiving the good, rather than it's already being in the cards that some are denied and others guaranteed the good, requires more than an objectively equal number of worlds in which different winners or losers are already deterministically in the cards. And therefore, someone who actually runs a lottery in a deterministic universe could not have conferred any greater fairness by having done otherwise. Okay, so just stop here. Thanks. Harry.
I guess on the last bit that you were going through, you said that you chose this one person unfairly.
Right.
I guess I'm trying to understand in what sense that's unfair. I mean, you said because you chose the person you preferred. I mean, I know we've been talking about fairness the whole time, but
okay.
It was maybe taken. Is it taken for granted what that actually means, or what makes something fair, or from whose perspective something's supposed to be fair?
Well, so I mean, let's just assume that maybe you chose on ground, you're a racist, and you chose on grounds of race, for example. Which one to get the pill? So that just seems to be I guess a clear case of unjustified exercise of partiality or bias. I mean, maybe choosing your child, that's a very different sort of case. I mean, choosing the person you find most attractive would be another case where it seems to be that there's an unfairness in your exercise of partiality. Now, it's trickier if you don't really have any grounds for choosing between people, and you just pick one. There may be no bias of the ordinary sort that you're exercising, and you might say, well, that's just a way of conferring epistemically equal chances. So there are some cases where it could be that merely just picking someone, instead of doing eeny, meeny, miny, or some randomizing, just picking someone might be a way of conferring epistemically equal chances, in which case merely choosing wouldn't give rise to an unfairness. But I guess in this case, let's assume, I gave the case of choosing preferring someone who's already privileged, namely the Queen's great-great-grandson. It seems that would be unfair because you're choosing someone who's already privileged, and let's say in this particular case, it's clearly a bias you're displaying in your choice.
Yeah, so that's maybe a good example, because I understand why some would say that's unfair, but I also don't see why that's just unfair, as a fact of the world. Certainly maybe from the Queen's son's perspective, it's not fair. It would be more fair for you to pick him.
Right.
Maybe the other guy doesn't want to be picked. Right, so there's a lot of things that it's fair, that it might, I guess I'm not seeing, I understand where the idea that bias comes in, but I also don't see anything inherently wrong with bias. There's always decisions that we make, and, bias comes into them whether we know it or not, right?
Well, you must surely, you must believe in anti-discrimination laws, right? In housing, hiring, etc. And it seems that, one reason why these laws are justified is because they eliminate unfair
Well, they don't, actually. So that's part of the, I guess what I'm saying is that the goal, I guess the objective is to maybe eliminate some kind. This is the question of from whose perspective is something fair, right? So just because you put a law in place doesn't mean that things are fair all of a sudden. It's because you might feel better about yourself, but So I guess it's in that sense where if you're deciding who to fire, this guy or that guy, if you flip a coin, you might feel like you're being fair about it, but maybe one of the people wants to get fired, right? So
sure, yeah.
I guess, and they've been actually working hard at getting fired, and now you're actually kind of, So I guess that's part of my question. Actually.
Okay, right. So I suppose I've been trying to just bracket those considerations. So just stipulating that the people have equal claims over the good, for example. These examples. But you're right. I suppose. There's a huge and interesting literature on the justification for anti-discrimination laws, which I suppose which I'm actually not all that familiar with. But I suppose that we'd have to probably go into a bit of a detour to address these particular questions about how does it choosing is unfair. Yeah.
We had in my lifetime, we did have a lottery in this country.
Draft.
Yeah. And my perception is that the concern there was not that the situation would be fair, which is what your kind of focus is, but rather that the government was acting fairly, that that was whether the authority was acting in a fair way. The lottery was the way to. Seemed like people thought that would be a way to make that happen. And I also think about this notion that someone should act in a way that's fair. Of course, does it always mean giving everybody a equal epistemic chance? You might give them an equal chance in some other way. The societies that reward things by examination feel they're giving everybody the same chance. I thought, I thought about an example of what might seem fair. So Mike and Barry are going to play a chess game, and each of them thinks they're the best chess player and is sure they're going to win. And I have an indivisible cookie that I want to get rid of, and so instead of flipping a coin, I just say, okay, I'll give it to the winner.
Right, okay.
See, how could you be more fair? Even if
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So right. So I don't want to say that. Definitely don't want to say that people always have equal claims on goods. That should be the upshot of which that either everyone gets the same amount, or if the good is indivisible, then you decide by equal lottery. I think there are all sorts of selection procedures, including examinations, which might well be fair, that don't involve people having an equal chance. But I guess, I mean, I wasn't so much interested in offering an account of when it's appropriate, or when fairness requires a lottery as opposed to another selection device. But saying, well, look, there are some cases in which it seems pretty clear that we should distribute by lottery. I think the draft may be a good case, where I think it's more than just that the allocator acts fairly. I think that people had equal epistemic chances. I mean, the relevant group of people had equal chances, irrespective of how privileged they were. I think that was also significant virtue of the lottery.
If you have bone spurs, you could get out.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, there are all sorts of ways in which people could get. I mean, and those are considered to be sources of unfairness. I mean, it really should have been a lottery where Donald Trump had the same chance of being drafted as anyone else. But it's just saying, well, there's some cases where we think, and so organs transplants are another case in which we think selection by lot is appropriate. And then the question is, of these cases in which we think that a lottery is appropriate, does it matter whether the lottery is deterministic or indeterministic? So I guess that was a question that I was addressing. Just try to take some cases where it's fairly uncontroversial that seems a lottery is the right way of distributing things, where there's no way of distinguishing.
But somehow, as a practical matter, it doesn't make any difference to whether we think it's fair.
Sorry, I didn't catch the beginning of the question.
If you say that the organ business, the organ allocating or deciding who gets the organ, does it make any difference to anyone whether those chances are objective or not? It doesn't make any difference to the people who are putting that lottery into operation, are trying to feel they're being as fair as they can. It doesn't seem like it would make any difference to them which of these things are true.
Well, I suspect that I expect that the ordinary person probably hasn't really reflected much on the distinction between objective and merely epistemic chances. But I think that and then or even why it is actually that lotteries are appropriate in these cases, and you might wonder whether the only reason we have to distribute organs by lot is to prevent the officials from behaving in biased fashion. But I think it's more than that, that we do want to give people an equal shot. I mean, we want to equalize something from the beneficiary's perspective and not just eliminate bias and partiality. And then this question arises, well, do the chances really need to be objectively equal, or would it be sufficient for them to be epistemically equal? I don't think most people have probably reflected enough to, or have the conceptual distinction sufficiently clear to have firm views about that. Barry?
Not about this, but different points of view.
Okay, did you want to?
Well, I mean, it's probably true of a lot of people, but actually on this point, I mean, maybe it's just a consequence of mass cynicism or whatever, but I think, you know, to some extent, in some way, people, I think, do have some awareness of this epistemic versus objective. I mean, I think that a lot of people, even though there is this lottery for organs or for the draft, I think at the same time a lot of people know that it's rigged in some sense, that if you wanted to get out of the draft, you could do it. And then, you know, maybe they don't have the means to do it, but some people do, or maybe if you know the guy who runs the organ list, you can get your name to the top of the list. But so there's a sense in which, well, but what else are you going to do? Because there's kind of also a resignment to the fact that there's always going to be those things, even though the system's in place to be fair. That, you know, it feels it's fair, but it's also, we know that it's not always fair in all cases. But, you know, so I don't know how that affects anything you're saying, but
Well, it seems that you could just not run either an objective lottery or merely epistemic lottery. It seems that, I mean, this fear that people aren't really selected by lottery sort of cuts across, I think, the objective versus epistemic. I mean, it would be there in the case of either objective or merely epistemic lotteries. Yeah.
So towards the end, you had this interesting argument. Let me see if I understood it right.
I don't know. I can't get this too.
I guess you'd have to you have to just play with the.
It was, the argument was something like this, that
Can't get the computer screen.
you wanted to give reasons
Oh.
to think
Maybe it's out of battery.
that
Okay.
that running a lottery is valuable, even if
It's different.
the fundamental laws are deterministic. And if I got you right, there was this interesting argument that if you didn't run a lottery, it would still be true that if you had run a lottery, in some sense, it would have been equally likely that this had happened if that happened.
Right.
Okay, that's a nice argument, but it won't work on the ordinary ways of thinking about counterfactuals. On Lewis's account of counterfactuals, where there are many equally close worlds, the right conclusion is if you would run the lottery, you might have gotten this result, or might have gotten that result, or might have gotten that one, but you can't conclude anything about how likely it is that you get any of the results.
Oh, really?
Really.
So why is, I mean, would you not describe this case as one where there are an equal number of possible worlds in which the A
Let's-
wins and B wins?
I don't think that follows either, but suppose there were an equal number.
Okay.
So what?
Okay, so nothing follows regarding objectively equal chances, you think? Okay, so why is it that we can't say that there's a sense in which
I think we can say it, but the reason we can say it has to do with something that was a presupposition you make at the beginning, which I would reject. And that is that if determinism is true, there are no objective probabilities. There are objective non-epistemic probabilities, even if determinism is true. But this is a story that's for dinner, not for...
Okay, so yeah, I did want to say that there are objective probabilities, even if determinism is true. But not of, I mean, if you're asking, could I have won this coin toss that I lost? If we're specifying this particular coin toss with its history, you know, it's got to be the coin toss that leads to my either winning or losing, say the organ.
I mean, could the whole state of the world be exactly as it was and something different happened? Of course not. But
Okay, right, yeah.
determinism is true.
So right, and that's what's relevant. That's what you're wondering about.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, okay, all right. So that's. I mean, so I want to say that, of course, you know, half of all fair coins tossed land heads and half tails. Even determinism is true, and there are all sorts of stochastic laws of the special sciences which are explanatory. Even if determinism is true. So I want to. I don't want to deny non-zero one chances in a deterministic universe across a whole range of things. But I do want to just say in this, I mean, interested to know where I go wrong in thinking that if you're just talking about whether I, with my particular history, could win this lottery or could have won this lottery, then if determinism is true, well then no. But
I mean, your particular history, of course you could have, but you mean the whole history of the whole universe?
oh, sorry, yeah,
No,
yeah, the whole
okay.
history. Okay, yeah, right, yeah.
Okay, who thinks like that?
Well, I mean, the thing is that I'm stuck with. I mean, I guess maybe you didn't. We imagine me with different universes before my birth. Is that? I mean, it remains the same person. Is that?
Well, what the outcomes of your actions now are depend on the motions of air molecules all over the place, which depend on cosmic rays coming from here or there, and so it depends on all sorts of things going on in the universe. So you're gonna have to keep all of that fixed, because you just got to keep fixed at any particular time, because the way the particular laws in our universe work, the state of the world of the universe at a time will entail either the determine, or if the laws are deterministic, or provide the probabilities of at other times. So you don't need the whole history. You just need it at a time, but you need a big swath of the universe, and nobody really thinks in those terms.
Okay, but if you're asking, could I have won? I mean, so could I have won the lottery that I lost? And then you say, well, if the prehistory were different, I mean, the laws are deterministic. If the prehistory were different, yes. But then the past is fixed, right? I suppose that.
What's so special about the past? Why not fix the future?
Okay, well, yeah, yeah. So I guess, yeah, so right, so there's a fixed.
I guess they put it like
past
this: there are a
claim
bunch of metaphysical presuppositions
Mhm.
to your discussion, which require a long discussion.
Okay, yeah, right, exactly. So I'm assuming the sort of fixity of the past, and I guess, right, and then once you push me on that, then I don't know what to say.
But the main point is that the counterfactual doesn't have the, and on Lewis's account of counterfactuals isn't evaluated as you were saying. So if you had run a lottery, you might have gotten any one of these different outcomes, but you can't say anything about their probabilities unless you build probability in some way. And I was saying, yeah, I do think there's a way to build it in, but not by what you're calling objective chance, but a different kind of objective probability.
Okay, so I mean, if the urns have 3 balls, 2 of them say A and 1 of them say B, then we'd want to say that in 2/3 of these scenarios in which I run the lottery, A wins and 1/3 B wins. Would we say that versus?
It depends a lot on the circumstances. Given the normal circumstances that we're thinking about, that's probably right. If you were to run it a bunch of times, you would get very close to 2/3, 2/3 the other, 1/3 the other.
Right. But wouldn't that so I mean so wouldn't Lewis or someone who has his account of counterfactual say that in 2/3, in this case in 2/3 of the possible worlds in which I run the lottery, A wins and 1/3 B wins, and that would ground in some sense an objective 2/3 chance of A winning, versus a case where it's just one ball says A and the other ball says B in all these lotteries that are run. I mean, wouldn't he draw that distinction between the case in which?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's another counterfactual. What would Lewis do?
Oh yeah, forget that.
I wouldn't.
Okay, all right. You wouldn't distinguish. In terms
I wouldn't do it for that. The way, given the assumptions of your discussion, where you didn't have objective probabilities, given that determinism is true. In other words, I think already in the actual world, without going to counterfactuals, there are objective probabilities which make it the case that in the lottery case, it's not merely epistemic, it's objective, that the probability of your getting such and such a result is such and such, even if the fundamental dynamical laws are deterministic. But I know this is going to take a discussion to you know where I'm coming from.
Okay, so now if we specify the actual let's just make these coin tosses or rolls of the dice, say. If we specify the actual coin toss in terms of, you asked me, what, do I have some grip on causal antecedents? I suppose that maybe, that's where you'll press me here, but if
Yeah,
we
I had that in mind, actually.
okay, yeah, specify the causal antecedents at the level of, say, whatever, classical deterministic mechanics. And I guess I also have to assume the fixity of the past. Then this particular coin toss that lands heads could not have landed tails. Is what I want to say about
So
that.
the fixity of the past isn't needed. You just need fixity of the causal antecedents, which you're calling.
Okay, right.
But for them, you need, what you're thinking of causal antecedents is a few things like the wind speed or I don't know what, but you actually need the momentum and position of every single particle in the universe.
Okay.
It's right that given all of them, the laws will entail what will happen, where the particles will be later.
Right.
But the same is true about the future. If you were to give them the positions and the momentum of all the particles in the future, they would also entail where the coin lands at the earlier time.
Right.
And so one might wonder, what's the big difference between these two?
Okay. All right. So okay. Well, I suppose all we need is to be able to infer the impossibility of the coin landing otherwise from the past. I mean, maybe we could also infer it from the future, but what I want to say is that even if one agrees that having so specified the coin toss, right. So I guess maybe what I'm thinking is, I mean, if you specify the coin toss in this level of detail, then it could only have landed heads. Let's say that it was physically impossible for it to have landed tails. Now you're saying, suppose that you didn't toss a coin. What would have happened if you had tossed a coin? Now I guess then you might say, well, depends on how specifically you specify the details of the coin toss, and
Right.
why not specify the details of the coin, this counterfactual coin toss, in exactly the same way as we're specifying the details of the actual coin toss. And I guess I see now that there may not be, basically, once you specify the same level of detail, then things may end up being the
that's
same.
the idea.
Okay, right.
Do you have a question? Or?
Just a quick question about the making a difference. So sort of also about how to think about the counterfactuals involving the deterministic lotteries. So before I didn't quite follow the making a difference argument, saying like the veil does not make a difference, but somehow the lottery makes a difference. And the contrasting case was, suppose that you had not run the lottery, then other people would have a chance. First, I was a little bit curious why that was the contrasting case, because I thought the natural contrasting case with the veil example is not had the lottery not been drawn, but rather had the lottery been drawn differently. Well, rather, had you reviewed the outcome of the lottery differently.
Okay.
So I was thinking, using the stretch card, you have two contrasting cases. One is having the coating where everyone has equal epistemic chance, and the other one is not having the coating. So you know, once you down the number, you know exactly whether or not you are the winner. Why are you going for? So I didn't quite see the symmetry there.
Oh, interesting. Okay, right. So so I guess so. One point is you can equalize epistemic chances simply by depriving people of knowledge. Okay, and that doesn't seem enough. make things fair. Or there's no obvious reason of fairness you have to go around making people ignorant of their fates. Okay. Now, right. So then I guess you could say, well, you could just distribute things with cards. Right. One of which already has printed, and we'll see who's the winner. Okay. Or you could put an opaque coating on all the cards. That's interesting, because that is, and we assume you don't change anything except for the cards have opaque coatings or not. In which case that would be a lot like the lowering of the veil. Okay. And so running a lottery that way, I think, would also be unsatisfactory. So what we need to do is draw the contrast that normally gets drawn to running a lottery, but just picking someone, or not allocating the good at all. And I think we need. You're right that it's not intrinsic to running a lottery that it will be difference making, but that one of the reasons why it's justifiable to run a lottery, even if determinism is true, is because of the fact that it makes a difference to who gets the goods as opposed to not running the lottery in the ordinary cases.
Yeah, I think I share your intuition. I think with the coating somehow it's fairer, even though it's the same lottery. So that's why I'm curious why it seems that in this case the counterfactual actually doesn't do any work here, because we're talking about the same lottery, so it's not like making difference who is going to win or not. If it's the winner, it's just a matter of fact of distribution of epistemic chance. In one case, the same lottery, you have the coating, so you have equal epistemic chance, whereas the other one doesn't. So I feel like if that's, and the intuition is the one with the coating somehow is the better lottery, then the betterness of the lottery over the veil, and in this case the betterness of the lottery with coating over the one without coating, does not come from making difference.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so right, so okay, so now to your point. So you think better to run the lottery with the opaque coating than with the results already revealed. Okay, so now I think that, well, now one complication is that there's also the fact of the distribution of the cards, which is our randomizing device. And you might ask, well, what, as opposed to running the lottery one way or the other, what would have happened? In which case, either of the lotteries is difference making, as opposed to having the opaque coating or not, but as opposed to not having distributed the cards. So you might have the virtue in both cases. And then you have this further virtue of the equalization of epistemic chances, I guess it's really just for a longer period of time, right? Because in this deterministic setup, the mere distribution of the cards, in a sense, equalizes that. Before, even in the case where there's no coding, while the lottery is being run, you have no reason to think that you've got a better chance than anyone else. It's only once you get the lottery card that you know that now you're certain to win, and everyone knows they're certain to lose. But of course, even with the opaque coating case, eventually when it's time to scrap the coats off, then people are in this condition of knowledge, and it could, and there's a weirdness that it may just be, well, the only difference is that we're ignorant for longer in the one case than the other case, and why should that be so significant?
I was thinking the distribution period shouldn't be taken into account if we're trying to compare the lottery versus the veil, because in the veil case, the distribution is fixed. You know who is going to survive and who is not. So I was thinking in the lottery case, you don't want to take into account somehow the distribution is what makes the lottery better than the veil. You want to fix the distribution of the who is going to the winner, so the winner is already picked, and now we're just talking about how to reveal the winner.
Okay, right, yeah.
So in that case, if we take into account the distribution period, then it's just a contrast of longer ignorance versus shorter ignorance, but we don't want to take that into account.
It's interesting, because this is a nice way of showing how within a lottery you can prize apart these two different considerations: ignorance, or ignorance for longer, and difference making. So I'll need to. So I guess I guess I tend to think that it's the fact that it's difference making which is doing a lot of the work, as opposed to this separate fact that you've nicely isolated of being ignorant for longer or less long. Of, so to speak, what you're then doing is just saying, well, okay, now the lottery's been run, so now our fates are fixed. Though the lottery made a difference to what our fates would be after the running of the lottery. And then the question is, should it matter whether we're ignorant of our fixed fate or not? And I guess I was thinking, well, I guess it does make some difference, but not as much as the difference of difference making. And the point, I mean, actually, you might even think maybe it doesn't really matter whether you have the opaque coding on the lottery. I mean, and say, and you can't scratch it off until later, otherwise the ticket's invalid. I mean, why should it matter whether we learn the result earlier versus later, so long as there was a lottery that was run that makes a difference? So yeah, so I guess I'm not as inclined as you are to think that it really makes a difference whether there's the opaque coding.
May I ask a question? That is, I believe you. I just gave me my point. That is, I think you introduced some objective probability with introduction of the lottery.
Okay.
You use this trick, maybe I have to say trick to escape the determinism. I will ask you whether you are really think so. So, do you think that in a determinism universe, you can run the lottery of the distribution of the medicine, or you can do not run the lottery? Is there a really alternative?
Right. So yeah. There's the fact that it could be that had you run the lottery, given the past and the laws, you could not have done otherwise.
Yes.
But still, counterfactuals. I mean, we make counterfactual claims about deterministic systems,
Yeah.
and the counterfactual is true, or very likely to be true, had I not run the lottery. Or actually, it's true, had I not run the lottery and not allocated it at all, then no one would receive the benefit, as opposed to someone receiving the benefit through the running of the lottery. That counterfactual is true, even though it could be, even if it's physically impossible for you to have done otherwise.
If you think that it is impossible for you to done otherwise, then I think the lottery is just use the counterfactual words to persuade people to believe that there is an alternative and there is a difference being made, and there they have a chance. But the truth is they still don't have the chance. So it's not so intrinsic different with the veil thing. The veil thing and the lottery thing, they are same, just to pretend or just to you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think I would disagree. So basically, you're sort of, I think, merging determinism and fatalism. Sounds like it.
In this case, how can you separate them? I mean, you think in determinism you can make different decisions or you cannot?
Well, it's compatible. So there's a big controversy over whether you could have done otherwise if determinism is true. Even if we say you could not have done otherwise, if determinism is true, these counterfactuals are still true. Had I done otherwise, even though it was physically impossible, things would have turned out differently. I mean, that's just, so even if, I mean, like, even if you think that the movements of the planets are causally determined, you know, we can assert all sorts of counterfactuals. Had this asteroid been on a different path, even though that was causally impossible, then it would have, whatever, obliterated planet Earth. I mean, all sorts of counterfactuals involving the making of the difference are still true, even if you think these different trajectories are physically impossible.
But if the counterfactual possible worlds cannot come true, then how can you say it is different with, you know, a possibility can come to true? I think we can say it is possible. It is impossible. It is only an impossible, you know, fiction or imagination. But it is actually more persuasive than the veil thing or just do nothing, because there are counterfactuals and counterfactuals are the ways we think. So I think that the difference is just between the persuasiveness.
So you think if determinism is true, then we can't make counterfactual claims?
We can make counterfactual claims, but counterfactual claims, if they are not possible to become the reality, then it is just the imagination. It doesn't make any real difference. It's just make people to think there is a difference. It is more persuasive. You know what I
I think so, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, perhaps, yeah. Can continue this discussion later.
I mean, I think it's an okay time to stop and continue at dinner.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.